guys, RPG Guy here, and today we're going to be talking about awesome woodwind writing. To clarify, before we get started here, there were some discussions and comments that came up. I even had some interesting private messages of questions, mostly, that people had about how to arrange, and they're like, well, you didn't really go into like the intricacies of arrangement. I said, yes, I did. I did go into it. But if you need to have, before you start arranging for big ensembles, you need to understand the fundamentals of arranging first. And I mentioned how you can practice that skill. It's a skill, and it takes time. You have to practice this skill very much as if you were a monk, and eventually you will be able to do this skill well. Once you can arrange something, for four voices, in general, four voices, whether you write it for piano, string, quartet, I don't care what you write it for, then you can expand on that and start writing it for chamber orchestra, concert, small concert band. Then you can expand upon it further. The fundamentals of it, I did cover. If you want to study music, you want me to explain all of music theory to you, I'm not going to do that. That would take a long time. And I did make some recommendations on literature, so if you need to, study up on your music theory, check those literatures out, and you can do it very much on the cheap. Okay, so that way you're not paying the ball-busting price of, $200 for a music theory book. You're paying, I think if you buy all those workbooks, you're paying like $60. And it'll teach you almost 90% of what you need to know to do arrangements, and even get you started in composition for as much theory as you need to know. So that's what you need to know. So anyway, all that aside, we're going to start talking about the woodwind section. Now, I'm going to go into every woodwind instrument individually, at least as a section. So, the next video will be about all the flutes. The next video will be about the oboe and the English horn. I'll even talk a little bit about I'll even talk about oboe d'amore, and I'll also talk about a little bit about, bass oboe and how ridiculous it is that people still write for that. I mean, it's a specific sound, and if you really want that specific sound, we'll get it for you. But there's only like 12 of them in the world in circulation, and they're more or less people renting them from each other. And when we get a request for a bass oboe, most of the people in the studio just burst out laughing, going, yeah, you're not getting a bass oboe, buddy, unless you're going to shell out the cash to rent one for, a week. Why a week? I only need it for a day. Because the guy that has to play it actually kind of has to learn how to play it. Because I guarantee you, if he did play it, he only played it once or twice. So you're going to have to, yeah, it's its own thing. Anyway, but one of the questions that comes up that I get is, what's the hardest section of instruments to write for? The woodwind, the brass, the strings, or the percussion? I find percussion to be the easiest to a degree. The easy thing about percussion writing is that if there's a sound you want, you just have to find it, okay? Writing rhythms and a lot of the other stuff, whether you're writing for multiple toms, whether you're writing for tambourine or anvil or glockenspiel. I mean, a lot of that stuff isn't that hard to do as long as you've had exposure to it to some degree. Brass writing, to me, is probably the easiest instead of group of instruments to write for. They all share very much the same characteristics of concept, rather, of how to write for that instrument. There's nothing that I've ever found to be too difficult writing for brass. Mutes can be a bit tricky, but I'll tell you this. Every brass instrument has a certain set of mutes that they go to, and that's really easy to kind of sort out a lot of that. And really from there, I can't really say much else. It's not... I've never had that much trouble with brass. Strings are kind of in the middle for me, and they always have been, even when in my youth, working in my youth at it. Mainly because, at least for me, my problem with brass has always with strings has always been bowing. I always had a lot of trouble. I struggled a lot with bowing for the longest time. Cursor is disappearing on me. And so because of the nature of that, I always found it somewhat difficult. Again, like I said, in my youth, because bowing was always tricky, not being a musician, not being a string player. Once I even used what I called cheaters bowing, which we'll discuss in our string videos. And that actually worked for years. Nobody ever said anything to me about it. And eventually I learned how to write bowing in. And even to this day, I still go back to my cheaters bowing because a lot of young string players have come up to me and go, have actually come up to me and said, well, you didn't write an up bow or down bow. You just put these special little slurs over the notes that you want bowed. And I said, I don't care if they're down bowed or up bow. And then they said, well, you did mark this bowing. I said, those are specific. So I want you, the specific ones I want you to do. I don't care. You as the conductor of this was actually a piece I wrote and had premiered. I said, between you and the conductor, you guys can figure the rest of the bowing out. Whatever works best for you guys. Because it's not going to affect my music to that degree, to the nth degree. It's just not. Well, a lot of composers say it does. And I said, a lot of composers also do fucking crystal meth, okay? I don't. A lot of them drink absinthe and play with their nipples late at night. I don't do that. So if I want something specific, I'll put it in there. If I don't put it in there because it's not that important to me. And some people are sitting there going, what the fuck has he been drinking? I'm like, absolutely. I've been drinking them since 9 this morning. No, jokes aside. The woodwind section, even as a woodwind pedagogist myself, woodwinds are always, as far as like my master classes, talking to other composers, talking to composition professors, colleagues who write for film, all of them have universally said, about 90% of them have always complained about writing for the woodwind section. Just universally. And the joke that I usually sit there and go is, I didn't understand why they struggled with writing for woodwinds. And then after some time went by, and I started looking at their own works and kind of critiquing them, and I noticed what they were doing is that 90% of, not 90%, about 62% of the music they were writing, they didn't know the instrument well enough. A lot of the composers, better than that, treated them like a brass instrument, which is a big no-no. That doesn't work that way. They were writing low oboe parts and low flute parts at, fortissimo, thinking they'll be heard over an entire brass section. And I'm like, well, the oboe might, but the flute won't. Not traditionally. So I don't know what drugs you were taking when you thought you could do that with a college band, but have fun with that. And, one person wrote an A flat for a bari sax part. And the guy, I talked to him, I said, bari saxes traditionally can only go to A. And he goes, what? I'm like, yeah, you have like 12 A flats within, 9 measures. And then you have this bari sax doing 30-second note runs all below G in the staff. It's just going to sound like me after a bottle of Go Lightly. It's just going to be like, it's not going to be very clear. And I don't know how you're going to get the A flat. And he goes, well, I heard you could take your shoe and put it in the bell and get an A flat. And I looked at him and I'm like, well, yeah, you can do that. And you better get a bari sax player who has a penis so long that he can, flex that muscle up and down to pull the shoe out when he has to get off the A flat. Did you think that far ahead? And he's like, what? And I'm like, anytime he leaves that A flat, the rest of the instrument's going to be flat. Because you stuffed a shoe in there. Or a sweater. Or whatever he wanted to put in there. I don't remember. And then I'm like, and then somebody's got to pull that fucking thing out. And he's still playing. And then you got an A natural in there later. In the same run. How is dude can't pull the shoe out. Well, what about the tenor sax player? And I'm like, that's not the tenor sax player's responsibility to do that. Number one. Number two, he's playing his own fucking music. Alright? No, that's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. And, you get weird shit like that. I have to be unique. I have to be special sniffy. Go fuck yourself. You're in the wrong profession if you want to do weird, bizarre shit like that. I'm sorry, PDQ Bach did it best, and even he did everything within reason. So if you really want to get an example of going batshit crazy and having a great time, watch PDQ Bach stuff. Go check out Professor Peter Schickley. He's like the nicest guy in the world. I've had dinner with him twice. And he has a very unique way of looking at things. You can watch his videos on YouTube about him. He did one in Carnegie Hall with, who who's the violinist? I want to say it was Itzhak Perlman, and conducting the Boston Pops was John Williams, and they did concert shtick for 2 violins. And that sums the guy up pretty much right there in a nutshell. Just watch the video of them performing that with the intro, and have a nice, take a hit of your bong, whatever gets you high, drink like 6 beers, and then just watch it. It's great. It's wonderful. And then really dive into what this guy. But he'll say the same thing. Writing for Woodwinds is rough, is pretty rough territory if you don't know what you're doing. And if you want to be avant-garde, look at what that asshole's doing. I mean, that's a great example of that in a nutshell. Or if you want to see something kind of avant-garde and new, listen to Danny Elfman's Schizophrenia. It's a wonderful piece. It's a neat piece. And it's original. Okay? You don't have to do the impossible to be unique. Trust me. Mozart did it. Beethoven did it to a degree. And a couple other people did it. And that's really it. Nobody really did anything... Schumann didn't do anything unique. His music was wonderful. He didn't do anything crazy unique, though. Like out of the box. Brahms was, known for the 12th, but then again, I mean, you have to, when you're doing arrangements and you're writing your own music, you have to plant yourself to some degree in reality. And you need to start there first. And as you get better at writing, then you can do some weird shit. But it has to be within reason, and you have to have a very solid, fluent understanding of the instruments that you're writing for. If you don't have that, you done goofed. Okay, nobody will play it. Nobody will waste their time with it. They'll look at it and go, I'm sorry, oboe doesn't go down to a low A. Or you want an English horn to play an E above the staff, and you want it fortissimo over the rest of the clarinet section going at forte or fortissimo, and you're never going to hear it. And that's an English horn solo. You'll never hear it. You just won't, and that's a critique of bad writing, and bad arranging and bad orchestrating. So understanding your woodwind section is paramount, and knowing how to write for these instruments is very, very important. And one of the quickest ways to understand it is to compare it with orchestral music and concert band music. This is maybe a bit, and this is my opinion about the section, but from my experience, the woodwind section is one of the most versatile sections in the entire orchestra. The sounds that come out of the woodwind section, each one is different. It's unique. No woodwind sounds alike. You can have and when I say that, I mean even the qualities of the sound themselves. Brass, a trumpet and a trombone have a very nasal quality, and they both make similar sounds, just the difference is the pitch. To me, a French horn and a euphonium is the same deal. They have very similar qualities to each other, but if you look at a bassoon and an oboe, they have very different qualities. They're both nasal, okay, but one is reedy and one is not. The bassoon has a really deep, rugged bottom. The oboe does not. It has a honky bottom. And it has this very, very clean, clear top, if it's done by a good oboe player. The bassoon has a thin top. Its top is very light. It's very thin. And if it's handled by a great player, it sounds wonderful. But the high end of the bassoon and the high end of the oboe have no relevance to each other. They don't sound like the same instrument. Maybe you could argue that with English horn and bassoon, but again, those are two different instruments. Bass clarinet and a bassoon have very different qualities of sound, yet they play in arguably the same register if you have a bass clarinet with the extensions. Bari sax, its own saxophone, has a different quality than all the other woodwinds. Bass flute also has a different quality. And so these are all instruments that play in the same range, but each one is unique and has a very different method of writing for. What is easy to play on bassoon may be very difficult for someone to play on a bass clarinet. What's easy on a bari sax might be very hard for a bassoonist to actually play. Bassoonists like doing jumps and leaps on the bassoon. They don't like playing scales as much as you'd think. They're more comfortable doing jumps and leaps. Bari sax players and bass clarinet players love running around. Bass clarinet players love running around on the bottom. Bari sax players, if they run around on the bottom, it becomes very muddy. So there's a parallel right there a conflict right there, rather, between those two instruments. The bass clarinet can sound much more reedy than the baritone sax. If I want that reedier, murky sound, I'm going to go with the bass clarinet over the bari sax. If I want that raunchy, kind of stripper, swinging sex mute porn track sound on the bottom, that big slap bass, I'll go with the bari. I'll go with the bari part. Because of those instruments, just in I call these the denizens of the deep: bassoon, bass clarinets, and bari saxes, and anything of those instruments lower. So contralto bass clarinet, contrabass clarinet, bass sax, contralto bass sax, which you never see, contrabassoon. They're all in one group I call the denizens of the deep. Okay, and that's just an example of that. Okay, this section of instruments have a very unique sound. Okay, and we're just talking the low reeds. Okay, they have a very unique sound, and many times in written music, the bass clarinet will have a different part than the bassoon, and the bassoon will have a different part than the bari sax. So all three of those guys might be playing different low-range things. Not always. You might have the bari sax doubling the tuba. You'll have maybe the bassoon playing maybe a clarinet 2 part, or an alto sax part, especially first bassoon. Second bassoon might be doubling it an octave lower. And the bass clarinet may even be playing something more along the lines of the clarinet section. So it's always very tricky. You enter tricky waters when you're writing for the bass reeds. And the same can be said about, and that's just the bass reeds, the same can be said about any of the other woodwinds. Now, you're going to have brass people come and tell you that maybe what I'm saying is misleading, and I would sit there and go, you write for woodwinds, and you'll see what they'll do is they'll write pretty much big, everything's being doubled like a big drum and bugle corps work. So you'll have the trumpets and the trombones doubling something, or the trumpets and the mellophone horns, French horns doubling something, and I'll go, okay, that's fine. You're taking the oval, the round sound of the horn and the nasal sound of the trumpet, and you're making its own sound. Good for you. I can do that with just the clarinets. I can make the nasal sound based on what registers they're in. If you want that piercing sound, I can put them up in the stratosphere. If I want that round wood and reedy sound, or even the round middle sound of the clarinet, that's where I can take second and third and put them in there. So there's a lot of versatility. Now, the thing with the brass is that you have a lot of control options. You can make different sounds with brass with different mutes, but you always have to be wary of the control effects. So mutes is for the brass is always the trickiest deal with them. But brass players as a section, you don't have them doing lots of runs, 32nd note runs, 16th note runs. You don't have them running around the instrument a lot. You don't have them doing too many big leaps and bounds. They don't like doing that really as much as a bassoon player does. And there's a lot of variables to it. Now, what's great about the brass section, we'll talk about that. There's great stuff in the brass section, so I don't want people to think I'm taking a dump on the brass section. Fuck you, brass guys! Suck my tits, bitch! I do have some little man boobs, so they can, All right, enough of that. Anyway, but at the same time, when you listen to a lot of orchestral music, and this is something you should practice, if you listen to a lot of orchestral music, who gets the most free time? Who gets the most solo time? Who plays the most solos? Who plays the most luscious parts? Who plays the hardest, arguably the hardest parts in orchestral and band music? It's usually the woodwind section. Now that's not everything, okay? I'm not saying all music is always woodwinds playing solos. No. There are brass things, but if you look at brass lines and compare them to woodwind lines, on average, the woodwind players got their work cut out for them. I've met woodwind players who've transferred over to brass and now professionally play brass instruments like they played woodwinds in high school. First thing they'll tell you is, this is a lot easier to do. I don't agree with that statement. I think that... I don't agree with that statement. We're playing fingering passages, learning alternate fingerings, dealing with mouthpieces, reeds. I mean, if you're an oboe player, talk to an oboe player and ask him how hard it is to make a reed, and he might slit your throat with his reed knife. He has no social life. He has to sit and make reeds all the time. It's part of the job. That's why the woodwind players make, on average, more money than the brass players in an orchestra. Usually the lowest paid woodwind player makes more than the second trumpet player, you know? And I think I even heard one, I think one of the LA Phil guys, he's like the second clarinet player, which is arguably the lowest paid player in the orchestra, in the woodwind section, makes more than the first trombone player of the LA Phil. I don't know if that's true, and you can ask them and see if that's still the case, but there's some truth to some of this, okay? There is some truth to this, because the instruments themselves are high maintenance, what they play, how they play, there's a lot more involvement, and when you're writing for these instruments, if you know how these instruments work, and you understand what the pros and cons, what they can do, what they can't do, your music will be all the better because of it. Okay, and that's the big statement to make here. I'm not, again, trust me, I'm not bashing brass. I'm not bashing strings or percussion. Don't get me wrong. I am just saying that there is an intricate world to writing for woodwinds. There are flute players who don't know how to write for bass and alto flute. They don't get it. It's not the same technique that you would use to write a flute part. And even though piccolo writing is similar to flute writing, there is a difference. There are things that you cannot do when you're writing for piccolo. There are rules that you have to abide by. And those rules are there because if you don't want to be punched in the throat by the piccolo player, you will do them. Okay, I'll tell you this. You could write as high as you want for a trumpet player, and I guarantee you somebody will be able to play it out there. You can be a total jackass. If you've got the money to hire some of the best trumpet players in the biz, go for it. They will hit your triple E, and while their nipples are hard doing it, you know, they'll do it. Listen to Trumpet Christmas, okay? That's why there's no Trumpet Christmas. That's all you need to know. I pitched my holiday right there. I pitched the holiday right there. And they'll do it. I know a trombone player who can play Brahms Clarinet Sonata No. 1 on his trombone in the range of the clarinet. Okay? They can do it because it's easier to do on that instrument. It really is. And the funny thing is that trombone player tried to play it on clarinet, and he couldn't get past letter B. He got up to letter B. And then when the 16th notes, the 5 tuplet, 6 tuplet, and 7 tuplet came in, he was done. And I'm trying to play it on. He's like, I can't. How can you do that? And I'm like, practice, bitch. So, coming from a guy who's played trombone his whole life, he writes jazz charts. He's starting to understand and write for his sax section and clarinet sections better. And now he's coming to me for, cracking at my head over flute. So, he's learning a lot. Just from taking a step back and saying, look, woodwind and brass are two different beasts. And woodwinds is tricky because I just learned how to write for saxophone, but I know nothing about writing for clarinet. Whereas he has said in his own words, he'll turn around and tell you, I've written for trombone. I don't play trumpet, but I know how to write for it. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, it's just like trombone, except it's in treble clef. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, the range is relatively the same. Trumpets can go a little lower below the staff than we do, unless you play bass trombone. And the trumpets don't like going much above a B flat above the staff on average. So I've got to figure it out. The low end is, kind of bronzy and kind of dark. And the top end is very bright and piercing. And I'm like, okay, so you figured out trumpet. Good for you. Have fun with that. I'm like, can trumpet players do 16th note runs? And he goes, well, they can, but you don't want them doing it for too long. And I'm like, oh, okay. Okay, and he's like, just like trombone. You can give trombone a run, but you can't really do it for too long. And I'd even say trumpets can trump trombones in doing runs, more on average, more often. And I'm like, okay, good. You have an understanding of that. So what about clarinet and saxophone? And he goes, well, they're similar with similar fingerings and similar mouth embouchures, but the instruments' ranges are just ass bad. Well, clarinet is inverted, so the weakest part of the instrument's in the middle of the instrument, and the strongest part's on the bottom, and the other strong part is on the top. And he's like, but I want to write this melody in the middle of the clarinet, but the rest of the band's going. And I'm like, nobody's gonna hear it. Nobody will hear it. Nobody will ever hear it. Just give it to give it to the saxes, or make them double back over to saxophone. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna have to do that. So there's some debate in that, and obviously I guarantee you every composer has their different opinion on writing for woodwinds. I've never met any one singular entity of composer that says this exact same thing. So we're going to have contrasting ideas, and that's fine, because we've all had different experiences. I'm telling you from the professionals that I've worked with and what they've said. These are guys that make union wage here in LA, who've told me their troubles with dealing with woodwind players, which is maybe why some woodwind players are a bit egotistical. Especially oboe players. I'm looking at you, oboe players. You sons of bitches. You think you're elite, motherfucker. I will eat your babies. Okay, so let's get back to it. So like I said, flutes are their own beast. Upper double reeds, oboe, English horn, oboe d'amore, if you want to add that in there. They're their own beast. Clarinets are their own section of beast. Alto, saxes of alto and tenor. Alto and tenor do not play the same. Okay, tenor has areas that it's weak at, and alto has areas that it's weak at. Bari sax, bassoon, and bass clarinet I've already covered. They're their own beast. They're their own deal. They have their own issues, and that's what we're going to cover in the upcoming videos. I think I've already got the flute one done, so I'll post that up maybe next week for you guys. I'm thinking about redoing it, but because I left some stuff out I should have covered. And I wanted to add more to it, but I wanted to put it in relative. I wanted to talk about it all at once, not mention it first and then talk about it like 7 minutes later. So I'll redo that one, and then we'll talk about double reeds, and we'll get into the grit of it, because that's where the grit's going to be, is in the double reed. A lot of people don't know how to write for double reeds. A lot of people struggle with clarinet writings, and a lot of people struggle with the denizens of the deep. Saxophone writing is pretty straightforward for most people. Even clarinet writing to a certain degree isn't too hard, because most clarinet players are like, oh, I get it. And flute writing isn't too bad either. Most people have a general consensus about flute. And I can tell you from a professional standpoint, I play all of those instruments in the studio professionally. I am a professional woodwind pedagogist. I am a professional reed doubler in professional studios, including Disney, Stony Soundstage in Culver City. I've played in those groups. I've played music that you might have heard on TV and commercials and stuff. I can give you a pretty good idea about the woodwind section and the intricacies of it. When we get to brass, there are going to be some intricacies that I'll give my opinion on, and rather than state fact, I'll give you an opinion of what I've heard, and when I hear it from professionals, and what I've heard as far as like technique, maybe mouthpieces when I can do a little bit of it. And then obviously strings we'll get some time, and we'll talk about strings, and then we'll probably have several percussion videos. I'm probably going to do two big ones, melodic and rhythmic percussion, and then I'll probably do actually I lied, I'll do 4. I'll do melodic percussion, rhythmic percussion, kind of what's called toys, which will include like some, toys will include all the little gadgets and cranks, the whip sound, how you get a whip, an anvil, a proper sounding anvil, and then kind of a more orchestral anvil. We'll talk about a lot of those different things in there. So maybe 3 videos on percussion for sure, because there's so much. I might talk about writing for set as well. At least in a concert band orchestral atmosphere, what the pros to writing for set and the cons for writing to set. Because writing for drum set in your orchestra or band, you need to be very careful with what you're writing for that. Because oftentimes people get carried away and assume their drummer can just instantaneously pull suspended cymbal sticks that are got the felt around it, and instantly just pull those out of his ass and go yeah right after going, and then at the same time have to go yeah, unless I'm gonna be derogatory again, unless he takes some drumsticks to his dong, he's not gonna be able to do that. Okay. Or you want like a really fast bass pedal. Well, you have to get 2 bass drums and a double pedal, and you could probably do it. I'm not going to be absolutely thorough on some of the names of those percussion instruments. I mean, like that thing, I just know a friend of mine once said it's a double pedal. I'm like, okay. And it just, you hit it once, and you hit it once, and you can it hits both bass drums based on how hard you push the pedal down. There's another one where it's 2 pedals side by side, digga, and so there's different versions of that out there. But we'll talk about cymbals, we'll talk about all that stuff when we get to there. And obviously we'll talk about manual instruments, which would be instruments with manuals. No, not with directions. We're talking about piano, organ, harpsichord, celesta, those guys. And we'll also talk about harp. We'll throw a harp in that grouping as well. But harp will get its own video. Whereas the celesta, the piano, and the organ won't so much. They'll all be in one video. But like I said, with the regards to the woodwind section, and I'm going to wrap some of this up because I know you guys are kind of like, he's just rambling, and I kind of am. The woodwind section being its unique as it is, you've got your instruments that make the round wooden sounds you want. I'm going to include flute in that group. You'll have flute, clarinets, and saxophones that give you that round kind of sound. And then you have your nasal qualities, which fall in oboe, English horn, and bassoon. Now, within the sax section as itself, just as an example, within each section of woodwinds, there is a woodwind instrument in there. Each woodwind instrument in those sections has a different quality of sound. A soprano sax sounds very much different than an alto, not just in range, but in tone quality. Okay, as well as a soprano sax and a bari sax playing in unison. You're not just hearing octaves. There are qualities of sound. There are differences in the qualities of the sounds. A E-flat clarinet and a alto clarinet have very different qualities of sound. Same with a bass clarinet and a bassoon. They have very different qualities of sound. A bassoon, English horn, and oboe. Each of those instruments has a very different quality of sound. And and it's even worse than that. Depending on what range they're in, that quality changes dramatically. Dramatically. The low end of a flute sounds very different than the high end of a flute and the middle part of the flute as well. And then the stratosphere, because a flute is a 4-octave instrument. Okay, so just on that alone, that's something you have to consider. And your writing and the quality of your writing and arranging will be based on those facts. How well do you know that instrument? Because if you're writing fortissimo, low D's below the staff, low C's below the staff on a flute, and you have the rest of the orchestra ramping it up at fortissimo, you are just wasting your time. Okay, now that's an obvious mistake. That's an obvious, if you know anything about orchestration, that's not a good idea. I'm just pointing that out dramatically. I can get a trumpet player to play a G below the staff, fortissimo, and I will hear it. Just as, maybe not as well as I hear the G above the G on the top of the staff, but I'll still hear it. Even with the whole orchestra going, I'll still hear it. That's one of the liberties that brass instruments get, where woodwinds do not. There are parts of those instruments that you may not hear very well. And so you have to adjust how you're writing certain passages based on knowing what can I hear, what can I not. The other aspect of it too is that woodwind instruments make great solo instruments. When you have a solo idea, I would honestly suggest, unless you specifically want a trumpet, specifically want a trombone, French horn, euphonium, tuba, unless you want a brass instrument or string instrument specifically, and you don't know who to give the solo to, look at a woodwind instrument, and I guarantee you will find the sound you're looking for if you look and try all the different sounds. So those are some things I want you guys to think about when we go and delve into the realm of the woodwinds. And we'll do them in score order, except for the denizens of the deep. I will save the denizens of the deep for last. Bassoon, baritone, sax, and bass clarinet. We will save those guys for the last. But so we'll be doing flutes first, followed by oboe, English horn, followed by clarinets, and followed by saxophones. And we will end with the denizens of the deep, because like I said earlier, they're their own shtick. And we may do bassoon by itself. I haven't decided yet. Bassoon and contrabassoon. We'll probably just do it all in one video. We'll cover bassoon, contrabassoon, bass clarinet, contrabass clarinet, alto contra, and baritone sax, and we'll even throw bass sax in there for fun. And we'll cover those each. I'll pull up little empty like scores of the instruments, the different ones. So when we do some flute writing, we'll have piccolo, flute 1, flute 2, alto flute, and bass flute, and we'll write some stuff in, and we'll talk about their ranges, their quality of sound. We'll get a lot of that stuff out there in the open. I'll even make suggestions of pieces of music that you can listen to where you can hear these instruments, which I think is important. You need to listen to what these instruments actually sound like. Because if you don't really listen to them, you're not really going to have a concept of what they sound like, and in turn not know how to best utilize them. So even if you're not going to arrange video game music and you're just interested in orchestration and composition, check out this video series that we're doing. And I pulled up a score that has a lot of woodwind in it to get you started. It's known as Pollyanna. It's from Earthbound, which is Mother 2. So if you play Super Smash Brothers and you know the character Ness, this is from his game. This is another one of the medleys that I'm working on. So there's obviously incomplete. I'm still working on it. I've only had about since I finished the arranging it for. I have an arrangement I did of it for organ, and so I wrote that all out, and then I sat down and I just started orchestrating this in around Thanksgiving. So it's still got some work going on, but as you can see, we've got our woodwind. We've got our little clarinet choir theme, intro here, and you're gonna get right off the bat when you hear that go. It should give you an idea of the clarinet color, because look at where the range is. Look at the ranges. Nothing is above the G in the middle of the staff there. Not a thing. And that's going to give you that low reedy quality. It's going to sound like a reed organ. It's very nice. We've got a piccolo part doubling a Glock part, I think, or a vibraphone part. Vibraphone part. I might change that. We've got a little tuba doing the bass line here. I want the tuba over the other reeds because the tuba is a little warmer. And it can hold back, it can play very legato and very connected and not give a reedy sound that I don't want the reedy sound. So you've got a piccolo, a tenor sax, vibraphone, and tuba going. And it's a very unique sound. And then obviously we bring our clarinets back in because they're kind of a good substitute for a string section, especially in that range. And then obviously we have a much bigger moment here. We've got some alto saxes, tenors, doubling horns, because we have the melody playing, and then we have a counter melody going that we're introducing as well. You may have some trouble hearing certain things because I haven't really messed with this in the mixer yet, so just bear with me on that. Like I said, I'm not working in the mixer. I'm not done with the arrangement. But so I'll let you guys enjoy this. When we get into the woodwinds, I'm not going to pull up like pieces for you guys to listen to as much. I'm not going to pull that stuff up. I'm going to instead, we're just going to dig into the meat of those to try to make those videos as short as possible, but as much as informative as possible. I wanted them to be informative and answer all your questions. So thank you guys for stopping by if I didn't say that already, and I'll probably say it again before too long, and enjoy Pollyanna. La da 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 dee da 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 dee da da. Sorry, yeah, that was it. I mean, there was a little bit of a vibe thing. La da 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 dee da da da. I haven't done that yet. Still on my list of stuff to get to. And then there's another verse I want to do in there. So, another verse of it. So we'll get to that. And obviously the slurs aren't written in. I didn't do the clarinet part in there yet. Amongst other things, there's more work to be done. And this is, you've heard the DuckTales theme, I think, and you've heard one other one. Grandia, but that's not part of this medley I'm working on. It's all Nintendo music medley. So maybe when I get to the brass, you'll get to hear Dr. Wily theme, because that's where I promote the brass, because that's a great little feature for them. And so that gives you guys, I think, a rough idea. You heard a lot of woodwind writing there. You know, you heard the oboe and how much on that A flat it'll cut right through. You saw a suggestion, an OSHA, if you will. If you were looking here in the oboe part, you know, I wrote an F down here. And oboe can comfortably get to a high E flat. F's pushing it. So if that oboe player chooses to take it down, they're welcome to do so. If two oboe players want to play that line and can, always have the second play the lower. I might even write that down an octave, or not write, you know, this run up an octave lower for the chance that they might want to have two oboe players do it. I haven't put solo in, you know, this is really a solo until you get to about here in the oboe part. So that's just as an example. There's not much of a bassoon part. I'm not going to really do an English horn part here. It's just in there out of habit, and then I can take out the bars, the instruments that I don't want, and that'll be one of them. So that's a pretty good idea. That gives you an idea of what we're working on. There's still more percussion parts that I need to put in. I haven't put in all the percussion yet. I still have my work cut out for that. But in general, you know, there's a lot of all the suspended. There should be some suspended cymbal stuff. I might put some little finger cymbal things, and I haven't decided yet what I want to do for percussion yet. So, but I'm getting the melodic percussion in there that I know I'm going to use. So again, guys, that gives you an idea of the woodwind section as a kind of a whole. You heard a tenor sax solo, you heard a piccolo playing by itself, you heard an oboe solo, you heard the clarinet section going all at once. And that's a good precursor to what we're going to be talking about, and neat little tricks and ways that you can use the woodwind section to do things like replace your string section. That's one of the things they do really well. And how you divide that up is going to be vary from piece to piece and color to color, timbre to timbre. You know, if you can master the woodwind section, you can master the brass and the strings, and even the percussion moderately well. So that we're gonna go to the hardest instruments, I think, to write for first and arrange for. So hold on to your butts. I think we're gonna have a really good time, and I hope to see you guys on the next show, on the next how to arrange video game music for. And like I said, we're getting into the orchestration stuff. This is the meat of the show, of the series. So I hope you guys really thought this was informative. Please ask questions below regarding arranging and writing. I will answer those questions to the best of my abilities. If they're easy questions, you'll get a response out of me quick. If they're very complex ones, I'll probably have to wait till I'm home from work to sit down and, you know, pull out any orchestration books to double check or confirm any questions that you might have. Because once in a blue moon, you get one of those weird questions like, tremolo fingerings for flute or something. It's like, oh yeah, they exist, so let me give them to you. You know, I'll tell you what they are. But you know, I don't believe in leaving any question unanswered as far as regarding to the subject at going on here. So thanks guys for stopping by. Again, I'll have at least the flute video up hopefully before the new year. Again, I'm going to be out of town with family and friends and shit. I got family visiting because they're useless. All of them. No, I'm just kidding. They're visiting right now because there's all these breweries in the area, so they're all checking out the breweries and stuff in South Bay. So I will say this, guys. Thank you for stopping by. Again, I will get more stuff out to you as fast as I can. For those of you who watch for my Let's Plays, chances are I'll either pull out Wild Arms 3 and start recording for that. Possibly, or I might pull out something fun like Chrono Trigger or Mario RPG. You know, just something different, something that's recognizable and fun. So that'll start probably in January for that, and we might start putting some Chairman of the Board shows up live on YouTube. So that'll be a lot of fun too. So that's our tabletop show on our live channel. So if you're into board games, Dungeons and Dragons, and all that kind of stuff, we do a lot of that on that show. Anyway, thank you guys for stopping by. I am your host, the RPG Guy. We'll see you next time. Bye! Shut up, Mr. Popo. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Please take a moment to check out more episodes from the RPG Guy, Tuesday Night Team Up, and more. And please subscribe. Always support the channels you enjoy watching, and while you're at it, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Google+. Keep on gaming hard. See you next time.